Okay, we are live now. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh, and I am the founder of the Audio Programmer, which is one of the largest audio development communities online. And it's a real pleasure to have you here. And I have my co host, Jose Diaz, who's here from New York. How's it going, Jose?
Hey, going good, going good.
Great. So I brought Jose along to speak with us as well because Jose has just graduated with his master's degree from NYU, and so both of us are actually fairly new to audio programming, and so we have a very fresh experience in terms of what is needed to do to get into this field, and we're happy to answer all of your questions. So if you're also tuning in from on the YouTube side, please feel free to put your questions in the chat as well, so we can answer them. And big shout out to Roland. I see Roland has joined us as well. Roland is from Traction, and he's a very experienced software developer as well. So please ask your questions, and we want this to be an experience where people can get a good idea of what they need to do to step into a career of audio programming. So let's go ahead and get started. So for everybody else, they've done a fantastic job so far of keeping their mics muted. So what I would ask is that unless you have a question, please keep your mic muted so we can keep the outside noise to a minimum. And let's go ahead and get started. So I guess a good place that we could start. We have one more person join us. I'll let them join. So I guess one place that we could start is just by maybe describing what audio programming is. So when people say the term audio programming, what does that actually mean? So I guess Jose, that's a question that I could pose to you.
Mhm.
When you hear of audio programming, what is it that comes to mind?
I think of two different things. I think of one uh, more DSP centered audio coding, which would be the implementation of DSP audio effects algorithms, whether that's filters, reverbs, what have you, and implementing those so they can be used on whatever platform, whether that's an embedded system or on a laptop, or even just for research maybe. And then I think that there's a more, I would say, dare I say, more software engineering side that I think is more concerned with the development of those things into usable products. Like,
Hmm.
how do we get the GUI to work correctly? How do we get the data to, like, how do we make a nice meter, for
Yeah.
example, like those kinds of concerns. So that's what I think about when I think audio programming.
Yeah. Yeah. So audio programming is, from what I've experienced, is a very broad term. And so people can refer to a lot of different things. And there are a lot of different types of audio programming that are encompassed in this umbrella. So people, when they're talking about audio programming, they could be talking about music technology, which is a lot of what we speak about on the audio programmer. So music technology, and in particular, the type of stuff that we do is what we call real-time programming, real-time audio, which is that you have some sort of audio input coming in live, and then what needs to happen is that there needs to be very intensive computer processing that will happen that'll happen within your CPU, and then you'll have some sort of output. So in a sense, me speaking on this mic right now into Zoom is a sense of audio programming. So telecommunications is actually another part of audio programming that people don't think about. And then you have the game audio community, where when they're referring to audio programming, that could refer to either making tools for people to for the programmers internally in their game studio to do really cool effects to for spatialization and things like that. Or it can refer to as well working really low level on the game audio engine, which is a very low level implementation of trying to actually make the audio for the game actually work. So, and then audio programming can also refer to what you call installations. So you have actual sound art as well, where people actually use tools like Max MSP and other tools to actually do these really amazing what they call installations, where if you go to some of these modern museums, they have sound art that is really interesting. So this is really some of the things that people can mean when you're actually referring to audio programming. So, with that being said, we could talk about this a lot further, but it would be great just to get some questions from some of our other people that have joined us. So, does anybody have any questions in particular that they would like to ask? Please unmute your mic if you do, or if they just want to listen. We could ask some questions from the. Oh, here we go. We have Matthew. Hi, Matthew.
Hey, hey guys.
So for everybody else, where are you calling from today? Where are you joining us from?
A long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm in London, in Hoxton.
Okay, great. So, what's your question? How can we help you?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about programming languages. Like what would you guys say are the kind of most valuable? I guess there's the side of like what's the most valuable in terms of getting work, but also what's the most interesting in terms of doing like creative stuff.
So, I can start with that. So, what the actual programming language to use for audio programming, once again, depends on what type of audio programming that you're doing. So, sometimes if you're doing any sort of real-time audio programming, then C++ is probably the best language to go with. And Jose, can you explain for us why C++ would be the best language to go with if you're doing any sort of real-time audio processing?
Yeah, well, I suppose in the most basic sense, it's simply the fastest language that we have that is high enough level to work with. It's kind of a dominant language for applications that have to run in real time. And then also there's simply the fact that I would say one of the more dominant, maybe the dominant, like at least in terms of a lot of the framework for audio applications right now is Juice, which is a C++ framework. And the existence of not only that platform that makes it insanely easy to write and deploy an application across different platforms, and the community around it, I think makes C++ a very important language. I mean, some people have talked about maybe moving to Rust or something. I actually don't know anything about Rust, but people are. I think there's always a conversation about like what's next. Do we stay here? But it seems like C++ is really what people are sticking with.
Yeah. So as Jose was saying, C++ is a great language for real-time audio programming. Real-time audio programming, just to kind of emphasize what that actually means, is that you could compare it to when you play a video game and you have a controller in your hand and you press a button. The immediacy of when the game reacts to that button press or to those controls is what I mean by real time. So as I'm talking into this microphone, you're actually hearing it with just a couple milliseconds delay, which makes it feel like it's real time, like it's actually happening in the now. And that is the reason that C++ is great for that, is because as Jose said, C++ is one of the languages that is the lowest level object-oriented language that you can use, that's above. So you have at the very bottom, you have kind of machine code, which is just zeros and ones. And that would take a very long time to program any sort of useful application just using zeros and ones. And then you have right above that, you have assembly or assembler language, which is a barely readable type of language. Once again, very low level. And then you have C, which is which is very readable, and a lot of people do their programming in C as well, and then you have C++. Then a lot of the other languages that people use that a lot of people start with, like Python, JavaScript, and what else do people start with? Java. Actually, a lot of those languages are actually built on top of C or C++. So what I try to explain to people when they are starting, the reason to use C++ for real-time audio programming is because when you're programming in a language such as JavaScript or Python, what happens is that it has to go back down to the lower level. So if you're programming in Python, for instance, it has to go through a C++ layer and then down into assembler, into machine code, and then it has to go all the way back up. And you have you have memory management as well, which is getting a little bit more technical than what I would like to do. But memory management essentially is managed manually in C++, or you have that ability to manage it manually, whereas in other languages that happens automatically. And the reason that that could be a bad thing is because what can happen is your real-time audio data stream is happening, and then something can happen where it all of a sudden needs to manage some memory, and what can happen is that can interrupt the audio stream, and that is a bad thing, because when it interrupts the audio stream, your audio may buffer, it may stutter, may stop, and that's why these other languages aren't very useful for real-time audio processing. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't other languages that you can't use in audio programming in general. So what we also have is this what's called offline processing, which means that you have an audio file, you need to do something to it. Let's say that you need to apply a delay to it, or that you need to compress it. And what you can do is what's called offline processing, where it's not real time. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen right in the now, but basically you can feed the audio data in, it does something, and you're not hearing it while it's happening. But then you can get a rendered audio file afterwards, and that is the that is the result of the real-time processing. So if you've ever worked in a DAW before, when you render an audio file down, when you render your project down to a WAV file, that is what we call offline processing. It's not happening in the moment. You can't listen to your song while it's happening, but it is doing the audio processing. Many people also start off with languages like Max MSP, which is a graphical node-based language, where what you have is you have these different graphical objects that you can connect with each other, and that you can do you can actually do really creative audio things with that. If you've ever heard of Max for Live, that's done with Max MSP. Max MSP is also built in C and C++. Then you also have MATLAB as well, which is great for prototyping. DSP, which stands for Digital Signal Processing. So you can actually do some real-time MATLAB things, and we're going to have a talk on that actually next Tuesday with a person from MATLAB, Gabriel, and he will show you how we can actually build a plugin using MATLAB, which actually converts it over to juice code when you get down to the lower levels. So I've done a lot of talking. It would be great to answer some other questions from people. So please feel free to ask away, please. I will, in the meantime, while we're waiting for other people to answer, I will actually look at the group. So one question that we have from Davril Shah is how people can actually get started with audio programming. So I can tell a little bit about my journey, and I'd love to hear Jose's thoughts on this as well. I actually started off by learning just programming concepts in general with a language called processing. So processing is a very small creative computing library that is Java. It's like Java, and there was a great YouTube channel from a person called Daniel Schiffman, who I believe is at NYU, and he's one of the leaders in the creative computing field, and he has a great YouTube channel called The Coding Train, where he does all of these really amazing creative applications just from scratch. He has all of these, and he does a great job at explaining how to get started just with computing. So I did that just to learn the very basics of what you call procedural programming. And procedural programming is where you're actually typing the words out. And then for learning the actual audio side, I started off with Max MSP, and that's great for learning just very basics of how audio is actually routed into and out of different parts of your application and how it goes from place to place. So I started with those two things, and then I moved to C++ eventually. And what did you start with, Jose?
I started with Python. So I started at NYU in 2018, and the first semester took Intro to DSP, our required DSP course. And as part of that, I learned basic signal processing concepts. And during that process, I really opened my eyes to being interested in doing this kind of work and having the ability to do so. So I actually reached out to Sean Costello,
Oh
who
yeah.
Hala plugins, and I asked him, I'm really interested in making plugins. What do I do? And he told me, I told him I was, a master's student, and he told me, try to convince them to let you do your thesis in Juice as an audio plugin.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and then I started watching Josh's videos actually, and got involved in the audio programmer community. And because of that community, I met Matt Chuck, who has this great C++, like a Juice-centric, audio programming-centric C++ class. So that's when I got really more into the actual C++ and was just, I want to make a plugin. I know that I should do it in Juice. So I had a lot of direct questions and problems that I had to get answered right now, or else like whatever wasn't going to get done. So yeah, it was very like as I went type of learning.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And most of the audio programming application types of jobs that I see on the market ask for C++. So just to help people just untangle some of the terms that we're talking about. So you have C++, which is of course a programming language, and C++ on its own there's not really a whole lot that you can do with it just by itself without using these different types of libraries. And when we talk about Juice is what you call a framework. So a framework is built around a language, or it's built in a language, and it offers you a lot of different pieces of what they call higher abstractions. So if we, for instance, we're talking about building a video game, it may take a very long time if you had to build a physics library from scratch just in C++. That would take forever just to do that. So you have these frameworks that offer these abstractions. So a game framework, for instance, may have some sort of physics library that you can actually pick up and use and change. And so Juice does this same sort of thing, but it does it for audio. So it actually gives you these higher level abstractions that you're able to actually pick up and use and to make your audio application. So you're actually concentrating on making the product itself rather than being caught up in all of the low level implementation. So let's have a look at some other questions here. So Here's a question that I actually don't know a whole lot about. So, would you recommend WebAssembly for making a web-based multi-track audio editing recording application? What frameworks and tech would you recommend for it? So, do you have any thoughts on that, Jose? I have a couple, if not.
I know I you know I don't have any experience with WebAssembly.
Yeah. So my so here is my understanding, and I hope somebody's in the chat to correct me if I happen to be wrong about some of these things. So WebAssembly, my understanding is that it's quite low level, and that for audio people within the industry, this is something that is on kind of the cutting edge of the industry in terms of how to make a web application that is that can do real-time audio, and specifically multi-track recording and multi-track audio. So my understanding is that WebAssembly is indeed what you would want to use. I don't think that that there are any sort of frameworks that are available for audio that would allow you to do it. I think you have to work with WebAssembly itself, so that could be a little bit tricky. But there are actually ways to do it with, and this is a discussion that I've seen a couple times on the Juice forum, is that there are ways to actually take a Juice application and use it within the context of web audio. So a C++ audio application, and then using it somehow within the context of web audio. But this is an area that a lot of people are really looking into. So you have that area of DAWs in the web space, and there are actually DAWs that are actually in the web space. I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head, but they actually do exist. And you also, the thing about that is that you also have to have all of your plugins and all your audio objects have to be built to actually work within the web context as well. So it's not like you can just take a VST and import it into this web-based DAW and actually use it. You actually have to have your plugins that are actually built in WebAssembly as well. So do we have any questions from anybody that's with us on the Zoom call at the moment? If not, I'm happy to.
Yes,
Yeah. Hi.
yeah. Hi, my name is Satyad. I'm from India, and just wanted to know what would be a good example of a Hello World program
Mhm.
in a basic Hello World in audio programming.
Yeah, so I think the hello world of audio programming to me is probably a gain slider, which is just a very simple slider that will take audio into your plugin, and you can actually adjust the volume of it, and then the audio goes out. So that to me is the hello world of audio programming, and I actually have tutorials on how to do that. I think it is Juice tutorial 44, I think. So I have a couple of them where I do the same sort of thing, but the most updated one, I believe, is 44, which is building your first plugin with Juice, I believe it's called. So yes, the gain slider is the hello world of audio programming.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I should mention quickly as well, for going back to programming languages really quick, that another great language, if you're looking at doing digital signal processing, is a new language that's called Soul. So it's just spelled Soul. So it's a very new programming language. I would compare it in the very simplest terms to Max MSPs, where it's like a node-based language, except it's in procedural programming. So procedural meaning that you're actually typing the words out, but it's it's a lot easier to learn than C++, and it's something that you can actually start with just in the browser without needing to download anything. So you can actually go to soul.dev, so soul.dev, and there are loads of examples that you can check out to get started with Soul as well. And I'm proud to announce, this is breaking news, that on the Audio Programmer, we're going to actually be having Soul tutorials, and those are going to be coming out starting in the next couple weeks. So hold tight for that. Great. Do we have any other questions from the Zoom group? If not, I will look here through the chat to find some more questions. Hi, Camilo. Yes, come on in, unmute your mic, and please.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Where are you calling from today?
I'm calling from Colombia.
Oh, welcome. Bienvenidos.
Thanks. Muchas gracias.
You're great. So what question can we answer for you today?
So you were mentioning the JUICE framework, and sometimes you were talking about some audio libraries or libraries specific for certain tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, what's the difference between a library and a framework?
So a framework is actually a library. I would say that a framework is a very big library, is the best way that I could describe it. Maybe the best way to say it is that a framework contains a number of libraries. It's a collection of libraries. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great. Who else has a question? If not, I can look here in the chat. So we have, what is a good first project to attempt in JUICE? So gain slider is a good one. A basic delay is also another good one. We have a question from Brian Mendoza, where he says, how much of DSP knowledge is needed? I'm thinking of taking the Coursera's DSP course before going really deep into programming. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Jose? Your specialty is kind of DSP, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, how much DSP? That's in a sense, it's a hard question to ask or to answer, because I feel like I can never know enough. There's always so much more to learn. And I think maybe the question is more, what type of problems are you trying to solve, and what is your current skill level? Because if you are familiar with C++, and you want to know about DSP, I would tell you to run, not walk, and buy the new Will Perkle book.
Yeah.
Because it's, having read, I'm almost like a DSP book collector at this point. So I have a lot of the other books that you would commonly get, like the J.O. Smith, the Karma Stanford stuff, and the Dofix and stuff like that. But I feel like this has the easiest to implement, most intuitive explanation. Like, because even and it's audio effects focused, because you see a lot of other, like the DSP books I learned on at NYU are much more general process for engineering students. So I mean, they'll talk about the same topics, but you're going to spend most of your semester talking about convolution, when really you want to be talking about the type of filters you want to use to make a sick Moog, simulation filter or something like that. So, and I know so that doesn't really answer the question, but I think that you can do some really cool things with not a lot of complication, I guess. But it's definitely, the more you understand, obviously, the easier it becomes. And if you have a good knowledge, if you have a college, like a freshman college level understanding of calculus and like linear algebra, it'll probably, I don't actually, my background, is liberal arts. I was an anthropology major, and I was very literature and music focused when I was in high school and in college. So all of this has been a lot more work for me personally. But if you're a math person, I think it should be somewhat simple if you find the right resources to kind of get yourself rolling on this stuff.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts on this as well. So one thing that I will say is that in terms of audio programming, is there are some basics that you definitely need to know that don't even involve math itself, just basics of how an analog signal is converted to a digital signal, what sample rate and what bit depth are. And so these are different sort of concepts that are your introductory concepts to audio signal processing. In terms of digital signal processing, one thing that I can tell you, having been around several music tech companies, is that you don't have to be a DSP expert to be an audio programmer. So most of these bigger companies, including the ones like Native Instruments, Ableton, and so on, a lot of times they have just a few people that are actually your DSP experts, or they're the ones that are actually writing the algorithms themselves, and that the other people are just very well. I caution by saying that being a strong developer is the only skill that you need to actually get a job in this industry, because it's actually a little bit bigger of a picture than that. But that one of the things that will help you get your foot in the door for sure is if you just have stuff that you can show people that you've built, things that you've done. And that to me is one of the ways that you can really get a foot in the industry, and that you don't need a whole lot of DSP knowledge in order to do that. So I'm actually working on a DJing application at the moment, and there's literally only a few lines of code that are actually DSP per se, where it's actually doing this mathematical thing to the waveforms. And so a lot of it depends on what you want to build as well. So, if you want to build things that are these really cool audio effects, then you'll probably have to get into DSP. One really cool thing is that Juice 6, which is coming up, I think in the next couple of weeks or within the next month or so, is that Juice actually has a DSP library where you can actually implement some of these effects without needing to necessarily know any digital signal processing itself. So you have like a delay line, you have a compressor, you have several different types of filters. So you don't have to know filter theory in order to be able to implement this stuff. It's actually just give it an input, give it an output, and show it what frequency that you want it to be. And it's really as simple as that. So that's that question. What else do we have? So we have a question from Hardfault. For an experienced embedded developer, what's a good development kit for getting started with low-level audio processing and manipulation? Very interested in Eurorack module and or guitar pedal programming. So normally for embedded, you have to do the C programming language. So normally you have to go lower level for C, but for embedded. But the great thing about technology is that it's been developing, and there are now advancements. And now you have this company that's called Elk. They're out of Sweden, and they've actually made a board that has a whole Linux operating system where you can actually use a Juice application on an embedded board. So you can do it in C++, and you can actually put it on the embedded board, and it actually works, and it's actually great. So there are options now, but normally it would be in raw C or C++, depending on what sort of board that you're actually using. So another place to start for audio programming as well is there's a framework that's called Audio Kit, which is an open source framework, and that you can that is actually written in C#, but it has C++ built underneath, and you can do Mac and iOS devices and with AudioKit. So big shout out to the AudioKit crew if you're listening. And I should also talk about some of the other frameworks that are out there that you can use for audio as well. So you have another one called iPlug 2, which is another open source framework. I've never actually used it myself, but it's completely open source. So some people use that to build their applications. And yeah, that's all of them that I can think of for now. Those are the main ones. Great. So what other questions do we have from the group? Anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask? Please unmute your mic if you do. If not, I can continue on with questions in the chat. Anybody? Okay, I'll continue on with the chat. And let's see here. So some people are suggesting the Elk board. Does Elk use Juice as well? Yes, you can use Juice within Elk. And we actually have a video from last month's meetup with the CTO of Elk, Stefano, and he actually shows how you can actually do this. It's a really fascinating video. Oh, what else? You also have the Bella board as well. So it's an area. This is something I don't know a whole lot about, but I know that you have this other type of embedded board called a Bella board, and that they actually have their own API where you can actually write real-time audio code. They actually have tutorials on that as well. So I think if you look up Bella board, BELA board on YouTube, you'll see that they actually have audio processing tutorials where they actually go through some of the basics. Any other questions? I'm still just combing through the chat questions. So Vincent asks, can you embed VST plugin code directly onto DSP chips like Shark and ARM chips and so on? No, not really. I think you would need to use Elk to actually be able to do that, from my understanding. So if anybody's wrong, please correct me in the comments or in the chat if you're around. Let's see, what else? What else do we do? We have Brian's question, which I answered. So we also have Ross, who has asked thoughts on tone.js. So tone.js is a sound library for JavaScript. And yes, that is a great way to get started as well, where you can actually start building audio applications with tone.js, which is a JavaScript library. Let's see what else here. Are we going to do any Max tutorials? I would like to do some Max tutorials. Maybe in the future, if I could find somebody really good to help me do the Max tutorials. Let's see. If anybody else has any questions in the meantime, please feel free to chime in as well.
There's a question from Bartek in the Zoom chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. So do you think that musical background is helpful in the industry? This is a fantastic question, and it brings me to a great thing that I'd like to emphasize. What do you think about that, Jose? Do you come from a music background yourself?
Oh yeah. So I immediately after my undergrad, I started playing in bands and ended up becoming an audio engineer. So I had, almost a decade of audio engineering experience when I started my master's. And that definitely, I think it helped establish some of the stakes in terms of why because I ended up having a very deep relationship with negative and positive with audio software, especially with plugins. And that's why I am where I am right now. But it also has opened doors. I definitely have gotten, internships specifically because of my recording experience, like at audio. Like I recently, last summer, I interned for Eventide. And a large part of that opportunity was because of my recording experience. and it helps me in my work right now in evaluating whether things are working the way that they ought to be, and for kind of setting expectations and being able to understand what a user would actually expect.
Mm-hmm.
It's not totally necessary, because I've come across many people who they're much more engineering oriented, or they're much more software engineering, like electrical engineering or software engineering oriented, and they can still do amazing work,
Mm-hmm.
because they're generally sympathetic to those problems and can do a good job. But I think I like to think it gives me a special boost.
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings up a great point, and I appreciate Bartek asking this question, because I think that having some sort of background, you don't necessarily have to have a musical background, but I think that it's very helpful, and that everybody, one point that I'd like to emphasize just in any sort of programming is that everybody has other experiences that they've done, that they've done in life, and things that there's probably something that each person knows about more than the average person. So for me, it would be DJing, because I DJ'd for a long time for a living. So I know about the art of DJing. I know DJing kind of inside and outside. And so there are so many different things that I know about that. And that knowledge has allowed me to create an application that most people wouldn't be able to create, because when you have that experience, you understand the user experience. You understand what a person that is using your product would want to see, or how they would want to experience your product. And so when you're thinking about getting into audio development, one of the first things that I try to emphasize is really think about your experiences with music, even if it's music production, and try to build your knowledge base around those other things, because it's those things and that extra knowledge that is really going to get you a lot further. And that it's great just as a developer, just to use your software development skills and try to somehow build them around your real life knowledge and things that you've done outside of just programming in itself. That being said, you don't necessarily have to have musical experience to be an audio developer. I do know people that have been pure C++ developers, and that they've actually got into audio programming just because their development skills were so strong. Great. So I hope that answered your question, Bartek. And we have a question from Jeremiah. Thanks for joining us. And he says, what books would you recommend for anyone who is looking to studying audio programming more? So Jose has recommended the Will Perkle book, Designing Audio Effects with C++. I actually have a bunch of books that I can recommend. I actually have a whole bookshelf that I can show you, but I have to walk over there to actually grab them to actually bring them over. But let me see if I can actually see some of those. So there is a book called Hack Audio by Professor Eric Tarr, who is a professor at Belmont University, and he has written a fantastic book on digital signal processing with MATLAB. So it may be easier if you're just getting started on developing to actually work through this book, and you don't actually even have to have any sort of programming experience at all. This is a great book to actually get started with, even if you haven't written a line of code before, because he actually goes through the basics of MATLAB itself. There's another book that I have that's called Music Mathics. So there are, I believe, 3 volumes of Music Mathics. And so this book is a little bit, it's a little bit more theory heavy. It's a little bit more mathematical. So it talks about things like FFT and convolution and these sort of concepts. But however, it talks about these things in a very easy to approach way. So you can't, I would recommend that you have some type of math knowledge or background in order to be able to pick this book up. However, it does a fantastic job of explaining the concepts. What other ones do I have? One moment. So another great book is called Electronic Music and Sound Design, and there are actually two. There may be 3 volumes of this as well. So these are actually in Max MSP. Those are fantastic. That's by Maurizio Ghiri and another Italian author. I can't. His name is escaping me right now. So those are great. And then for the C++ side, the C++ side is kind of tricky because I don't actually recommend really reading a book about C++ and just working your way through the book to actually learn C++. It's everybody has different experiences with this. My experience and I would say the majority of experience that I've heard from other people that are that have been in the field is that it's better to program C++ through practicality. Which by that, what I mean is that when you pick up C++, you have to learn the very basic essentials to actually do anything. But once you've done that, then what I found is that building a useful application or building just some sort of play project is really the way to go, because what happens is that as you work your way through a real project, you're going to find obstacles that get in your way. And in order to get through that obstacle, you actually have to learn a new concept in order to actually push through and get to the next phase. And that, I think, is a lot of just software development in general, for whether you've been doing it for 1 year or whether you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, is that there are these concepts or these tools that maybe you're unfamiliar with them, and that you get to an obstacle and you say, I need to do this thing and I've never done it before, and being able to actually ask people and Google and actually go to places like the Audio Programmer Discord and ask, and that you actually pick up this new knowledge along the way. And before you know it, you're just doing it intuitively. You know, you're not even thinking about it so intensely, like when you first start. So build practical applications, build practical projects in order to learn software development rather than reading a book. That being said, for C++, there's a great book that's only about 100 pages, I think, and it's called A Tour of C++. And it's by Bjorn Strostrup, who is the actual creator of C++. And so that's a great book. It might be a bit intense if it's your first programming, your first foray into programming. He has one that is actually a more beginner focused book that's called, sorry, the light is, I'm going to go over and grab it. 1 second. Here we go. So this is called Programming Principles and Practices Using C++ by the same person, Bjorn Strostrup. Actually, let me go grab the other books as well so I can just show them to you. One second, just grabbing these. Okay, here we are. I'm doing this because so many people ask me about books, so it's good to show them here. So we have A Tour of C++ by Bjorn Strostrup. That's a good one. Probably best if you have some sort of programming experience. So that's a good one. And then there's this one, which is you need to have some math to do this one, but it's a very good one. It's called Audio Effects Theory, Implementation, and Application. And that's by Joshua Rice and Andrew McPherson. Who
Yes.
I believe they're at Queen Mary University of London, and this is a fantastic book, one that I need to read myself actually. And then we have Alessandro Cipriani and Maurizio Giri, and this is Electronic Music and Sound Design, volumes 1 and 2. So this is fantastic if you're starting off with Max MSP. Fantastic books. And you don't even have to be doing Max MSP to actually get these and get something out of them. These are just really awesome books. And then this is Music Mathics Volume 1 and 2. So this is by Gareth Loy. And these are really good. As I said before, it's useful to have some math knowledge in order to be able to do this, to read through this book effectively. But those are fantastic. And then finally, hold on, I'm just gonna shut off my Skype. Somebody's messaging me. There we go. Then we have Hack Audio by Eric Tarr. Once again, fantastic book, great for beginners. Takes you through making a lot of the common DSP algorithms that you would see, like compression, delay, chorus, reverb, and all of those things. So those are my book recommendations. So I hope that that's helpful. Great. So then we have another question from Sartiath. What universities or colleges would you recommend for a master's in music technology or audio programming? So I guess we'll start with you, Jose. How has your experience at NYU been?
It really depends. If you are interested in kind of more narrowly construed, like making audio products, like audio plugins and processors, I think that NYU is probably not the number one choice. NYU is a fantastic program for things like music informatics and for performance related applications of music tech, and also immersive audio, and also ironically, what's the word? Not telepresence, distributed performance.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of audio programming, I know I keep saying Perkle, but Miami, I think it's University of Miami.
Yep, that's right.
They have an audio engineering program that's, I don't think there's anything quite like it, at least in the US, where it's like somewhere between a music program and an EE program, mm-hmm. with like where you can actually do like study audio programming directly.
Yeah.
Like NYU was great because they gave me the space to do what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely very much like just doing my own thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. University of Miami has produced and Will Perkle and the staff there. We have to commend them for a moment because they've actually produced quite a few alumni that are very active in the field. So you have Jay Coggin, who is a really amazing software engineer. And then you have Chris Santoro, who's over at Sound Toys. I believe he graduated from University of Miami, but there are several people that I've met that have actually studied there. And so that's an excellent program. You also have Belmont University with Eric Tarr and the staff there. So Eric Tarr does tutorials and classes with Juice. And so he's a great one. Another one, if you're getting more into the game audio world, is there's a school I can't remember if it's in Washington or if it's in California. It's called DigiPen, DigiPen Institute of Technology. That is another really amazing program. There's a person that's developing for Unreal, for Epic Games, named Maxwell Hayes, who's part of the community. That he studied through DigiPen. He was telling me about the program. Sounds really awesome. And then over here in England, you have Goldsmiths, which is the university that I graduated from. They're really good. Once again, I think the thing is that a lot of the stuff that you do in some of these programs is very self-guided. So, because universities need to actually appeal to a wide variety of different needs. So you have some people that are musicians, and they want to create some sort of interesting technology that augments their instrument. Then you have other people that they want to make plugins like us and real-time applications. Then you have some people that want to make installations, so they don't necessarily need it to be in C++. So they have to cater for a wide variety of needs. And so my journey through there was very much the professors were there for me for sure, and but it's really on you to decide what you want to create. You know, they're not going to hold your hand. And then you have Queen Mary University of London, which has a fantastic mastering program for music technology, and I know a number of people that have graduated from there as well. They've done collaborations with Waves, and with they've done a lot of great things in that on that side. So those are a couple programs that I think of off the top of my head. Let's see, what other questions? Do we have any other questions from the group before I go over here to the chat and find some more? Anybody have any questions? Okay. So we have another question. So what is our opinion about the online course, like online courses for Juice, like Cadenza? I haven't taken the course, the course from Output on Cadenza, but I've heard positive things about it. Of course, if you know about Output, you know that they make really awesome plugins that are at the forefront and cutting edge of what's happening in music plugins today. And so they are very good developers, and a big shout out to Bruce and to Spencer, who are over there at Output. So I would definitely recommend it. What I would recommend is there's a first part that you can try that is free. So I would try that, and if you enjoy how that's going, then I would go for the paid part. We also have another program that is from this person named Matt Cat Music. So he does a C++ course that's catered towards people that are in the music field, and it's called Programming for Musicians. You can find out more about that by going to the website on theaudioprogrammer.com, and you'll see a link to click to find out more about that course. And then, of course, the tutorials off of the Audio Programmer as well. So we have, I think, over 100 tutorials now on the Audio Programmer. So yeah, so there are quite a few resources out there. Any other questions from the Zoom before I go on with the chat questions? Anybody? So let's see. We have question: how often do you meet clients with requests that don't have a standard solution, especially in game development? Well, I mean, for me, I actually have a audio programming agency where people query me for solutions all the time, and I've never actually done any sort of game development. But in terms of audio plugins, people ask me for different stuff all the time. Every request is different. I think that you have certain ones that are quite standard. Oh, I want a delay, I want a multi-effect that's for like a vocal chain, things like that. But then you get very specific use cases that call for very bespoke type of solutions that are unusual, or they require a number of different, maybe more than one person to actually solve the problem. What else? Anybody else got any questions in the group? Let's see. So we have a question from Mel Meadows. Which programming language would you recommend for someone who's tried learning Java and JavaScript and never got anywhere with them? Asking for a friend. That's well, I really think that when it comes to real-time audio programming, I would say that it has to be C++, really. But I would start off with maybe Max MSP or Soul. See if you can get started with that, and then step up into C++. So I think C++ can be a very steep learning curve at first. You have to eventually go back to C++ at the moment for audio programming if you're doing it in real time. Then we have a question from Sid. Do we have any thoughts on how machine learning and AI is changing the field at the moment in terms of analyzing and processing audio? So I do. I know a little bit about machine learning and AI, and there are some really amazing advancements that are actually being made in this field. So one of the issues with machine learning at the moment and AI is computing power. In terms of if you're running a neural network on audio, that takes a serious amount of processing. And at the moment, a lot of it is just impractical for a real-time plugin. However, there are some really exciting advancements that are being made for digital signal processing. I actually had a conversation with a DSP engineer the other day, and that's going to come out in a couple weeks. But one of the things that we were discussing was about how normally if you're trying to take if you're trying to recreate some sort of process, some sort of digital signal process that's happening with an analog piece of gear, let's say a guitar amp. So one way that people do this in today's industry is they actually try to model the different circuits and the different electrical parts that are happening in the analog world, and they try to convert it into the digital world. But now what researchers are doing, they're actually creating neural networks that are actually able to recreate the process of what happens in these guitar amps without actually doing any sort of modeling or anything. They just build a neural network that's based around running a clean guitar signal through this through the amp, giving the output, and they train a neural network on that, and the results are very stunning, actually. So you've got research on that for guitar amps, compression, I think reverb. I've seen some stuff on that. So it is a very exciting space. Also, you have the Google Magenta team that actually built some machine learning plugins in Max MSP that you can use in Ableton. I'm not actually sure what they do, but I know that they do exist and that people have been singing their praises about them. Also, Isotope is one of the companies that's really known as being forward thinking in terms of using machine learning in their plugins for stuff like signal isolation, signal cancellation. You have the company Deezer, which is a streaming music service, and they've come out with an open source library called Spleeter, which actually uses a neural network to actually split music tracks into individual stem groups. So there is a lot of stuff, a lot of exciting stuff that's happening in machine learning that is very exciting, and I think it's going to continue for the next few years. Let's see. Any other questions from the group before we continue on in the chat? We're over our time at the moment, but that's okay. We'll spend a couple more minutes here. We have a question from Music Catlin Rochester, and it says, "Do you use Faust for prototyping or plugin design?" I haven't, but however, in our audio programmer community, we actually have a Faust room that's quite active, and we have people that are actually from Faust that are actually in the group. So big shout out to Stefan Letz, who is in the group and helping people get started with Faust. I've heard that Faust is really amazing for prototyping audio effects and building them quite easily. I haven't used it myself, but I've heard fantastic things about it. Let's see. I made a mistake about AudioKit. So it's actually Swift and Objective-C that's actually used for AudioKit, not C#. So thank you for the correction there. And let's see here. My screen just jumped, so I need to go back and find where I was at. Wow. Juice approaches the granular synthesis. I don't think that there's any sort of granular synthesis abstractions in Juice just yet. So we have another question that's, how can I design 3D-ish UIs for audio plugins? I think that's quite difficult. If you did that, you would need to probably use OpenGL to actually be able to do any sort of 3D design for audio plugins, and OpenGL is pretty darn tough. So a question from Ryan: is Juice a hobby platform, or can you go full scale professional with that? So Juice is definitely a professional framework, but you can use it for your hobbies as well, and that it is a framework that a number of well-known plugin companies actually use Juice to actually create their audio products. So I would say that it's the most comprehensive framework for audio programming that's out at the moment. Let's see what else. Is it possible to build a synthesizer to a Unity plugin? That's a great question from Harry. I don't actually know. I believe so. I'm not sure what the Unity plugin format is, but this was actually an interesting question, that an interesting topic that I spoke about with this company called Audio Kinetic. So they are the people that are responsible for building what's called middleware, which is for game audio. Which is for game audio implementation. And we were talking about how you have these middleware. They're kind of like DAWs, but they're a little bit different. And they use different types of different plugin formats. So they aren't just standard VST AU plugin formats. They're specialized, but there are some people that actually build audio plugins that are specifically for these middleware technologies. So you have two main ones. You have one that's called WWise, or Y. I think it's just called Wise. I don't think it's called WWise. And then you have another one that's called FMOD, FMOD. And those are the two main middleware environments that people use for building the audio events for their video games. And what else? So here's a question. Can you tell me what the difference between hardware VA synths and VSTs? So virtual analog synths versus VST synths, and are they better? That's a question. I don't really know if I can. Do you have any thoughts on this, Jose? Because I don't really know.
What's the difference between VA and
Virtual analog synths and
Uh-huh.
and modern VST synths?
Well, I would maybe kind of recategorize those, because there are many synthesizers that either advertise themselves as being virtual analog or use processing techniques that can be classed as being virtual analog. And whether they're better is, I mean, it really depends, because there's a lot of drawbacks, right? Or there's a lot of things to balance, right? Like the Yuhi Diva is an amazing synthesizer that uses virtual analog techniques, such as very specific ways of realizing the filters that sound absolutely amazing.
Hmm.
But there's also a huge processing hit because of that. So it's like, there's
Yeah.
always that balance between what sounds good and what your system resources are.
Yeah, yeah, and I've heard the Yuhi the synthesizers from them, and they're pretty stunning. So I would say that that nowadays the computing power that we have now, that in the difference between analog gear and what you have with what you can recreate in VST and within your within what they call in the box, I think it's very minimal, extremely minimal in terms of being able to tell the difference. So we'll take a couple more questions here before we head off. We have a question from Fedir. According to your experience, do companies look for experienced pro C++ developers only, or are there opportunities to start with the junior level and learn on the fly? So there are opportunities that are out there for sure, and they tend to be with your bigger companies, your Focusrites, Abletons, Native Instruments. The thing is that each company has kind of their own culture that where they cultivate talent, and they're able to build their talent. The biggest thing for a company that I think is to keep in mind is that these companies, they have to make money. The thing is that with your smaller companies, the smaller the company, the more that they tend to go for somebody that's more experienced, because the shops are so small and they have to iterate very quickly. With your bigger companies, a lot of times they have the very strong senior kind of development staff there, and they're able to help bring other developers along. And we actually have a very interesting talk coming on Tuesday at our monthly meetup from a developer named Spencer Rudnick, and they are a developer for Ableton, and they work on the live team, and they were actually hired with no C++ experience. They were a web developer and got hired with no C++ experience, and they're going to tell their story about how that actually happened. So be sure to join us on Tuesday. So there's a question from Teneku. Do we have any recommended tutorials for starting with C++? So there are two of them that I recommend highly if you're looking for videos. There's a person that I really got a lot of value from called The New Boston on YouTube. So he's the guy's name is Bucky. I think his name is Bucky, and he has, I think, like 75 tutorials, and they're very quick tutorials. Normally they're like 5, maybe 10 minutes, and they're just on the basics of getting started with C++. And those were so life-saving for me and so he's great. Another person that I can highly recommend is one called Cherno. That's CHERNO. And he is fantastic. He's a game developer. I think he used to work for EA, but now he's just independent on his own, and he's actually building his own a game engine called Hazel, and he's excellent. He has a lot of great explanations for different concepts with C++. So I would highly recommend that. We have a question from Mina. Do you prefer a top-down or bottom-up approach for people who learn audio programming? Is it better to start with the programming part and dive into DSP later on, or start with the DSP concepts first? So do you have any thoughts on that, Jose?
Oh boy. Well, yeah, it's kind of it's another hard question to ask, because it's like you could start by programming simple things and maybe implementing already written DSP code, but understanding of DSP really, really, really helps in implementing those things. The first things that I started doing were very simple tasks in Python. And I think Python is a great space for learning that, because there are a lot of pre-made libraries for analyzing and plotting. And so like literally the first audio effect I ever wrote was a downsampler, and a very naive one, just a decimator, just every other sample. So learning, basically, that was a great way to kind of understand what essentially changing the sample rate, how that changes the pitch of a sound, and how fast, the sound evolves over time. So I'm sorry if that was a bad answer, but that's all I can think is start really, really small,
Yeah.
And then it also depends on if you're comfortable in any language at all, because then I think if you're not comfortable in any language, I think Python might be a good place to start, just to kind of start getting programming concepts together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well that, as I said before, what I did was I started actually with Max MSP. The big challenge with starting with something like Juice or with C++ is that it really can take a little bit of, it can take a while to build anything of any sort of use other than a gain slider. It takes a while to really build anything. And I think that's changing. That's going to change with Juice 6. But one of the nice things about some of these other programs, these other technologies like Max MSP, for instance, is that you can get sound going just in 30 seconds. And that, you can't really do that with C++. Also, Soul is really good for that, getting a sound going just really quickly. So in terms of learning the way that audio is structured, I would say that that going with something like Soul or with Max MSP is a great way to go. In terms of learning procedural programming, like Jose said, learning something like Python is a great way to get started, or just getting yourself into just the thought process. Once you have the thinking and the thought process of being a developer, and anybody that's developed for any period of time knows what I mean by that. The thinking about the problems and the method for solving them. Once you have that down, you can really transfer that. You can really transfer that to other languages quite easily, and the syntax is actually quite similar for a lot of them as well. So, great. Okay, looks like Camilo has another question. Yes, Camilo, how can we help you?
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys have any experience programming for a Raspberry Pi or one of those mini computers. Do you think they have enough CPU power to, build a practical audio application, such as a synthesizer, maybe an effects pedal? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have. I've built a virtual instrument a few years ago using an Arduino. But in terms of experience other than that, I don't really have a bunch. But what I will say is that I think for building like a serious synthesizer, or something that makes makes more of a complicated sound than just a little bleep, and that actually has real features, I would probably recommend the Elk board probably for that, or the Bella board. Those would probably be the two that I would go with. I think that you can do it on a Raspberry Pi, but I think that that it can be a challenge for sure. I think that there are some kits that actually allow you to do it. Great. So here's a question from Leanne. Do we know if hiring in audio programming has been affected by the coronavirus? So that's a question that I can answer quite easily. And from the trends that I've seen in the industry have been that that hiring has definitely slowed down when coronavirus hit. I think because people were just not sure exactly what the impact of it was going to be long term. And I think that long term, in terms of audio programming, the effect, my prediction is that companies may go more towards the contracting side for hiring developers or bringing in developers, because then you don't have obviously, I think a lot of people are very uncertain about moving to new areas and how the coronavirus is going to affect people long term. And so I've seen a move from technology companies to move more towards the contracting side, at least for the short term. And that though I do see people, some companies starting to open that up a little bit and starting to hire again. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? I'm not sure how long to actually do this for, but I guess we can go until we're out of questions. So questions about VST editors saying they faithfully recreated hardware synths or mixing channels. How do they do that? So this is about analog modeling, which is a huge subject in itself. And we actually have a podcast that's coming up about that, where we discuss that very much in depth. But to generalize just here in this discussion, what I would say is that there are two main approaches, and sometimes it's a mix of these two approaches. So you have what's called a black box approach and what's called a white box approach. So a black box approach is essentially that you have let's say that we're doing a guitar amp, and what we have is a clean signal that is the input, and then you have a distorted signal, which is the output. So a black box approach would be to use techniques such as convolution to actually make measurements of what the input looks like and how that's different from what the output looks like. And you basically use the differences in the sound, and you try to get an approximation. You use various techniques to try to get an approximation of the differences of the sound, and you use that to build your audio effect. Okay. Then you have what's called a white box approach, which is where companies or developers try to basically mimic the behavior of each audio component that is in your that is happening within the actual guitar amp or or whatever the technology is. So inside the guitar amp, you're going to have some sort of transistors and all of these different electrical components. And so what they try to do is they try to implement those in software using a program called LT Spice. And then that's what they use to actually do what I would describe as a faithful recreation. So I think that that's a technique that's commonly used at companies, some of the bigger companies like Universal Audio and some others. So Let's see, what other questions do we have? What framework do I need to use to make a scalable vector interface of a VST plugin? You can actually do that with Juice, actually. You just have to make your coordinates for all of your UI. You have to make them relative to the size of your window rather than doing it statically. So that's I don't want to get more specific than that, or else that could turn into a whole discussion by itself. Let's see. What other questions here? Okay, so there's a question from Teresco. Out of curiosity, are there any resources for building VSTs without a framework, building your own small framework? So there are companies that do this. There are many of the companies that have been around for since the early 2000s, before Juice kind of came to prominence. They have their own actual internal framework, and you can do this. A lot of independent developers actually do this as well. I wouldn't advise it, but and that's another discussion that I had recently with people. But you can definitely do it. You can download the VST SDK from the Steinberg website, and you can actually do that. But you run into a number of challenges. One of the challenges being that first of all, you're only going to be able to build VST format. So you have these other formats like AU format, audio unit format, and that you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to build that separately, or you'd have to make modifications for that. Also, you would have to think about cross-platform development as well. And that's one of the biggest things that I think Juice offers that other frameworks don't really offer, is the ability to just basically hit build, and it'll build your plugin for AU, VST, and then all of the operating systems that you want to build for. So Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and it does all of those basically from one code base. And you cannot, as far as I know, you cannot do that with any other framework, except for maybe, I'm not sure if iPlug. I think iPlug you could build cross-platform, but I don't know if it does Android or iOS. Oh, let's see, what else? So there's a question: when programmers think about optimizing, talk about optimizing a program, what does that mean code-wise? So what that means is that when you're doing different operations, and when you're doing your code, when you're building your product, I'm going to mute Jose here. When you're building a product, you tend to just kind of go through it and just do it just to make it work. And then and there's a saying in computing, I can't remember the exact saying, but it's something like, but basically the whole kind of idea of it is, don't try to optimize your computer program too early. So don't try to make it super optimized, super efficient too early on, because you'll just be caught up in doing that rather than actually building anything useful. So I always think about somebody like artists like Michelangelo, when they paint something like when they're painting or when they're sculpting, or like when you see like the Mona Lisa, a lot of times what artists do is they do like a sketch of the full painting before they actually start coloring in and start iterating over the whole thing. And the reason of that is, like, you don't see artists many times where they paint like an eye and then they do the full detail of the eye before they've moved on to anything else. So many times they do a sketch and then they just iterate over the sketch over and over again. And that is what I would advise for coding as well. Get it working and try to get it compiling without error, and then go back and then try to optimize, make the workflow more efficient, try to look for edge cases that can crash your program, things like that. A question from Ryan: Is my dream of being an indie plugin developer full-time an actual possibility? Absolutely, it's a possibility. There are a number of indie developers that are actually out there doing it. I think the key to that is you have to have an angle. You have to have something that is different from what other people are actually offering, and that could be different in terms of like what it actually does. It could be different in terms of your marketing. You just have to have some sort of angle that is unique to what you're offering. Let's see here. There's so many people. How much math knowledge is ideal? I think we answered that. So the main difference between good and bad sounding audio algorithms. I don't know. That's a tough one, because what sounds good or bad is very subjective, isn't it? It's not very, like, what sounds good to one person may not sound good to another person. But I guess one thing that we could talk about is like when it comes to wavetables and things like that. A lot of people talk about removing aliasing from wavetables and band limited oscillators and things like that. So I guess that's one thing, is that not to get into sound theory too much, but when you have a wavetable, what can happen is that you get frequencies that are happening above above our range of hearing that can actually fold onto itself and fold onto the frequencies that we actually do hear, and actually interfere with it in a way that may not be pleasant. And they call that aliasing. So that would be one thing that I would think of. Let's see what else. Just looking through. Okay, 3D looking plugins, we've answered that already. Oh man, sometimes this jumps on me. So Ricardo asks, can we share the resources and links on the Zoom chat afterwards? Yes, I'll actually do a whole thing where I show all the resources, all the links to the books that we discuss. Maybe if I've got the time, I'll do all of the school programs as well, links to those, if I can find the time and motivation to put all that in. So let's see here. For targeting multiple platforms with Juice, is there a lot of extra work in order to have all the header files and correctly formatted to properly execute? So the nice thing about Juice, so this is a question from Daniel Tauscher. So the nice thing about Juice is that it's able to actually compile for multiple platforms from one code base. And that's one of the big things about Juice that really makes it appealable, is that so you don't have to worry about doing platform specific things for the most part. There are exceptions to that, but for the most part. Let's see. What could be a beginner approach to overloading Juice functions? How could I tell it Juice to call my own version instead of its own? I guess one of the first questions that I would ask is, well, why? The first question would be why? Why would I do that? You know, why? Like, can you give me a specific use case of when you would want to do that? And maybe based off of that, I could give you an answer. But there are times where you're actually able to use parts of Juice without having to use the whole thing. So Thomas asks, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, different developers have different relationships to Juice,
Yeah.
especially ones who have a lot more experience might have a lot of their own methods for dealing with the the variety of different things that Juice does for you. So you really don't have to use, I mean, obviously there are certain parts of it that you just have to use it, because then why are you using it otherwise? But especially in terms of the GUI and parameter handling, you can kind of forge your own road. But of course, the tools are there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people do the opposite as well. They use Juice for the for the UI, for the user interface, and then they have their own backend for the processing. So Thomas asks, how can I start freelancing in the audio programming space? So Jose, do you have any advice for this? I do, but I'll let you offer some advice. Freelancing for audio.
Yeah, well, I would say that the most important thing is to, personally for me, since I was interested in working with audio plugins, was to make my own audio plugin. And that also, for me, that led to these other things that are also important, whether or not you're making audio plugins, which is getting involved. There's like some really great supportive communities, like the one Josh has founded on his Discord, where there are a lot of audio developers who you can meet, and also through like the Juice community, where I've definitely met with people and found some opportunities through that. I mean, my current job I have because Josh connected me with somebody. So I think, but I wouldn't have gotten that job had I not had my own plugin that I had already finished, that then I could show to this person and say, hey, I understand the Juice framework. I understand the basics of DSP. I understand C++, and I can be helpful. I'm sympathetic to your product. So, so yeah, make stuff, I guess, is the real, make stuff and meet people, don't be shy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You have to, the biggest thing that I try to tell people, and everybody of course has their different experience, but one thing that I say is people, especially nowadays, have to know you exist, and they have to know what you're able to do. If you can do all of these amazing things, but nobody in the world knows about them, that's not very effective. So you have to show people what you know. And the biggest thing that when it comes to getting hired, so a lot of people ask me, how do I get hired by a company? What do I need to do? What skills do I need to have? The biggest thing is that every scenario is different, but more than anything, people have to be able to see you doing that job. So you either have to know the skill that's required to do the job, or if you're in a bigger company, many times they'll hire you if they feel that you have the capacity to learn the skill, that they can teach you to learn it, and that you know how to pick things up very quickly, and that you will be able to learn the skill if they teach you. So those are the things. And also another thing, like if you're working with a company, is a thing that I think people really, pardon me, that people really underestimate is how well you fit with the team, how well you fit with the people that you're going to be working with, the people that you're going to be working alongside. There has to be, I don't like the phrase culture fit. That's not really the phrase that I'm looking for, but they have to feel that from a personality standpoint, that they can get along with you, and that they can actually tolerate you on a day-to-day basis. Okay. And I've seen so many times developers that are amazing developers, really phenomenal, like really know how to do things really well, but that they're just really tough to get along with in the workplace. And because of that, nobody wants to work with them. So no matter how good you are, if you can't get along with your peers and colleagues, people will not want to work with you and not want to hire you. So do not underestimate the power of your personality. When you're coming in for a job interview, you want to be super enthusiastic. You want to let them know that you're going to be able to pick up these new skills very quickly, that you're very open-minded to their approach. And that is, if you have those things, I've seen developers that don't have the technical skill, but they have the personality, they have the aptitude to learn, and that I've seen companies give people a chance just based on that, if you don't even have the technical skill. So you got to definitely bring the right attitude to the table. So what else? What do I think about Synth Edit for making audio plugins? So I've never actually used Synth Edit, and I wasn't actually aware of it until very recently. And yeah, I've heard that some people have used this thing called Synth Edit to actually make a synthesizer. So I think that it's actually deprecated. So I don't think that whoever made Synth Edit is actually making it anymore. And I heard it's tough to get actually working, but I heard you can make stuff with it. Let's see. Let me just scroll up. How much can I earn? This is a great question. So I think let's see. Let's go with that maybe as the last question. Yeah. So I think we'll wrap up. I think we'll wrap up with this last question. How much can you earn as a developer? It's such a big question that people ask me all the time, and the answer is it depends. It really depends, and it depends on a number of factors. Anything that's about pay is based on a number of different factors, and that it's not a very straightforward question to answer. So what I mean by that is that if you look in the U.S., for instance, of course, the classic example is Silicon Valley or San Francisco, where the cost of living is extremely high. In order to live in that area, you have to be making over $100,000 really to like live a decent lifestyle there. Just because the cost of living is so insane. But another aspect is some of the other things that people don't really think about is healthcare. So needing to pay for your own healthcare if you happen to get ill for one reason or another. So who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for your healthcare? Is it going to be the company? Is it going to be the government? Is it going to be Is it going to be some sort of health insurance? Is it going to be you? So that's a question that goes into it. Also, vacation time is another big question. So in the U.S., a lot of companies don't tend to give like paid vacation time as well. So another question is, if I take a vacation, am I going to get paid? So that factors in as well. So what you tend to see is that the pay is actually a lot higher if you're living in like LA, in California, in New York, that it tends to be higher just because the cost of living is higher. But then when you go over to Europe, the pay tends to be substantially lower. But a lot of the reason is because you have paid vacation days many times if you're hired full time. You also have in most of Europe, I think all of Europe, you have a government health plan that will where you can actually literally walk into the hospital if you're sick, and they will give you and they will basically see you essentially for free, which is a concept that many people are unfamiliar to in the U.S. So with those things being factored in, and of course the lower cost of living, the cost of the actual salary that you earn tends to be lower in Europe. And also in areas of the U.S. that aren't in your big cities as well. The actual money that you earn tends to be lower. But there, that's, I guess my conclusion is that the money question, how much you can earn, is really a loaded question, and it's not just the actual salary that you earn. So take that into consideration. Great. So I think we'll end here. Does anybody from the Zoom chat have any other questions by chance? Is there any other questions? If not, I guess we can wrap up here. Thank you very much for everybody that tuned in. And wow, I haven't seen how many people have actually joined us, but I see that we have 67 people that are watching now. And wow, that's pretty incredible. And wow, I hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you once again to Jose for joining me to help answer these questions.
Of course.
And thank you to everybody that joined us asking questions. And if anything, and by the way, another thing I should mention is anything that we say here, please take it with a grain of salt, right? I encourage you to go and to research these things yourself. You'll probably find differing opinions on some of these things, and maybe you'll find some stuff where we're completely wrong. And so I give you that disclaimer, just kind of signing off. And if you feel that we're wrong about any of these parts, please correct us in the comments below. And we have, I should announce at the very end as well, that we have an audio programmer monthly meetup that is actually happening on Tuesday, the 10th of June. So let me just pull that up very quickly while we're here for everybody to see. So meetup. So this is a really exciting meetup that we have. We do this once a month. So it's on every second Tuesday of the month. So we have Gabriel Bonkaila, who is from MathWorks. He's going to show us how to build a real-time plugin using MathWorks, using MATLAB rather. We also have Spencer Rudnick from Ableton, and they're going to tell us how they got a job at Ableton on the live team without actually knowing any C++. So that's going to be a really exciting story. And we also have Scott Hawley from Belmont University, and he's going to show us about his the audio classifier that they've been working on with Art and Logic called Vibrary. Big shout out to our sponsors, Focusrite, Juice, and Sonux for helping to support this meetup. And so join us. We will be there Tuesday, 9th of July at 6:30 British Summer Time. So that's it. And we're going to sign off. Thank you once again to everybody that joined us, and we will see you soon.